Hi folks, Wonia Tebow here, and I am getting ready to teach hide tanning at an Ancestral Skills Gathering starting next week. And since I'm messing with hides anyway, I figured I might as well walk you through the prep that I do when I'm going to be teaching at an event. So these hides were stored in a freezer for a while, and they were kind of poorly skinned, so they had a lot of chunks of meat and fat on them, and they have a lot of slash marks, unfortunately. So usually I skin hides really well if I'm doing the skinning myself so that I don't have a lot of flesh or fat on there, and then I store them by salting them well. So I went ahead and fleshed these before throwing them in to soak them because I really don't like soaking hides with the meat on. It takes longer to soak up, and it's turning the meat that could be a resource for something to eat, like we fed it to the chickens here. Little known fact that chickens actually are into meat scraps. Kind of weird, but it's true, and then they turn all that protein into delicious, nutritious eggs. Whereas if you soak the hides with the meat on in either a water or an alkaline solution, then that meat is not fit for consumption. So one, so that the meat is still a resource, and two, the water gets so dang funky when you're soaking hides with the meat on. I'm not into it. So even though it's a lot more work for me to prep a class, I still like to flesh the hides before I get them soaking. When I'm teaching or when I'm tanning hides just for myself, I'm often just soaking the hides in water. And the soaking process is something that is going to help kind of break down the glues, gluing the top layer of the skin, which we call the grain. It's that shiny layer on most like belt or boot leather or leather you're familiar with from standard leather shops. So what we're doing is we're getting those glues to break down a bit so that we can physically push the grain layer off of the middle layer of the skin, which is called the dermis, and that's what we're after for buckskin. So in order to break down those glues, you can either soak them in just water, and then the bacteria will start to build up and they'll actually eat that glue. So you can harness bacteria to help you do the work. Or if you don't want to go the bacteria route, which can lead to potentially over rotting your hides, and it can get a little on the stinky side. So when I'm going to be teaching students in a public space where any kind of smell is not ideal, or if I want to keep the hides longer than I might otherwise keep them, then I'm going to soak in an alkaline solution. So the process of soaking hides in an alkaline solution is called bucking. And in that technique, you're actually letting the alkalinity of the mixture break down those glues for you. So it's either bacteria or alkalinity. And again, the thing with the bacteria is you don't have control over your timing, because once those hides are ready to scrape, you'd better start scraping them or they can get too rotten. The alkalinity gives you a preservative effect as well as breaking down the glue effect so that you can have a longer window during which you can get to the hides, which is super helpful if you're teaching or working at an event where you have a specific time that you're planning on working the hides. So I fleshed the hides and then I put them in an alkaline solution, and my preferred alkaline solution is hydrated lime. So this is a limestone or oyster shell that's been burnt to turn it into calcium hydroxide, and then you add water to it, making a hydrated calcium hydroxide solution. So I'm mixing hydrated lime in with water to a concentration where I still have some solids of lime in the bottom of my bucket. And then I'm going to have kind of a milky, opaque water that's a fully saturated calcium hydroxide solution. The beautiful thing about hydrated lime is that it can't get too alkaline. Other substances you can use are potassium hydroxide or sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is lye. And these can be really, really intensely alkaline, such that you can burn yourself or your hides with them. So they tend to go a little bit faster and they have a stronger effect, but they're also gnarlier to pour into the environment when you're done. They're harsher on your skin, harsher on the hide, and risks breaking down your hide overly. So I try to stay away from that. Another option is wood ash, and similarly, you can get your solution too alkaline with wood ash. Another thing with the really strongly alkaline solutions is that they make the hide really, really thick and rubbery and kind of snotty, and I really don't like working hides like that, and I don't like that stuff splashing up in my face while I'm scraping. So the calcium hydroxide, the hydrated lime, is kind of the lesser of evils in terms of the bucking, in my opinion. One thing to keep in mind when you're bucking is to try to keep a lid on it. I have a piece of plywood I'm using because a lot of insects are really drawn between the salts. If you had salted hides, which I always rinse the salt out as thoroughly as I can before putting them in the lime. But if there's any traces of salt, a lot of insects, particularly bees and wasps and hornets, will be drawn, and also meat-eating wasps and hornets and such will be drawn to the meaty smell, potentially. Another good reason to flesh your hides first. So you can end up with a lot of dead insects floating in your containers. So best to keep them covered up to not unduly affect the populations of insects in your area. But so that's my process here. Fleshing the hides, putting them into a solution of calcium hydroxide, and then usually 3 or 4 days is good. It really depends on the temperature and the thickness of the hides. But that's what we're looking for, is that hair slipping. So a couple times a day, I'm just stirring these around to make sure that there aren't any areas that are kind of folded up where the solution isn't fully penetrating them, because any spot that isn't having access to the lime solution can potentially rot, and I don't want that. I want them all evenly bucked and having good access to all parts of the hide. So I've been stirring them several times a day, and there you go. There you can see where I'm able to pull some of the hair right out of the follicle relatively easy. So that is prepping hides for scraping.